Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Garden Cinema. Welcome to this beautiful new screen we have. It's my first time in there, so I'm very excited. And a big round of applause for our guests who've very kindly joined us for this. Thank you very much for this post-screening Q&A to discuss the film, answer any questions you might have. I will ask a few general questions about the film, about the making of, about your relationships, and then I'll open it up to the audience fairly swiftly, because I imagine people have quite a few questions for you, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So let me start off with a bit of a starter question, but could you tell us a bit more about the germination of the idea of making this film? Where did it come from?
Well, the germination was just before the pandemic. I was surprised to see Joel Meyerowitz on the streets of London. As a lifelong fan of Joel's work, I was thrilled to see him, and like a true fan, I followed him for a while, summoning the courage of trying to figure out what to say to an artist hero. And I followed him into a couple of shops. And then I lost him. And I was gutted. And I came home and I said to Manon, we're a married couple. And I said to Manon, I just saw Joel Meyerowitz, but I didn't know what to say. And I've lost him. And gutted. Anyway, I saw Joel again a couple of weeks later. And I thought, right, I have to say something this time. But this time, as fate would have it, Joel was with Maggie, and it was meeting Maggie and Joel together that went in incredibly deeply. When I saw Maggie and Joel standing side by side in the brief conversation that we had, I was so taken aback by their aura that you see in this film. I was kind of magnetized by them. And this encounter stayed with me for a couple of years. And during the pandemic, I came across Maggie's wonderful blog, which is on maggiebarrett.com, and check it out. And really fell in love with Maggie's writing and openness, and this idea of a documentary sort of percolated. And so we had a Zoom, and it was we hit it off. And then Manon and I started talking about what would this be for us as a couple to make a film about another artist couple, separated by 40, 50 years of life experience, but with so much in common. And we had dinner, the four of us, and it just clicked. And then 2 months later, Maggie and Joel invited us to actually stay with them under the same roof. And so throughout the year of filming, we lived with Maggie and Joel. And it was, yeah.
That's remarkable that it's basically a chance encounter that's motivated you to make a whole documentary. It wasn't the thought of, you're a filmmaker who wants to make a film, and therefore you're looking for subject matter. You just happen to think this could be a very interesting thing to explore. How about Joel and Maggie? When you were approached with this idea, what were your thoughts? What did you think of it?
Well, the first thing was I received an email from Jacob, saying that saying basically what he had just told you, and I showed the email to Joel, and I said, "What do you think? This could be fun," and it was when it was, and so we wrote back and we said, "Well, yeah, why not?" And then we zoomed, with Jacob and Manon, and I have to say we just fell in love. It was instantaneous, really, and so there was no doubt in our mind that we were going to go along for the ride. Yeah?
I think there is something else that was important to me. When you meet someone or a couple who have something intuitive, a powerful intuitive response to something that offers a kind of promise to their lives as well as to ours, if you recognize that, it's hard to say no. A lot of people might want to make a film for other reasons. They have some idea of fame or money or who knows what it would be. But it wasn't projecting. That wasn't projected from them. Something much more necessary was
Yeah,
there.
and off of that, of course, Joel's has been asked many times, people want to make a film about Joel, but nobody had ever asked to make a film about us. And so I felt immediately seen by these remarkable young people. And I think that for all of us, as we get older, to be seen by young people is always a gift. So, yeah, I'm sure you've got more questions.
It's a really fascinating. Yeah, I think for me that's what's so special about this is seeing an evolving dynamic between four people. How did you? Let me ask this another way. How did you feel changed by this experience at the end of that whole process? Did you feel like you've come on this journey and you're somewhat different people at the end of it? And that goes for really all four of you, I'd say.
I definitely felt changed by it, partly because, as I say, I was seen as an equal by two young people who I respected as human beings and as artists. And also, we've been to a few screenings now, and it's not very often that you get to see a whole year of your life condensed into an hour and 40 minutes. And boy, you really do see yourself. And there were things that I could speak for both of us, but we saw about ourselves that, oh, wow, I'd really like to change that. I don't like that aspect. I mean, it's not like I didn't know about my resentments and blah, blah. But when you actually see them like that, and you see, because what it is, the beauty of film is that you get to watch the whole of something. When you're in relationship, you're only in your own part of it and emotionally responding to the other person. So to be able to stand back and look at the whole of it and see the things that were triggering that I had a choice now about whether I wanted to continue that way or whether I wanted to let go and be more responsible for my place in the world.
Yeah, it's a bit like a therapist looking at a couple, really, and seeing the
Except
whole of
cheaper.
the relationship. And you came to that conclusion after, as you watched the final film, not during the process of filming.
Well, the change during the filming for me was a sense of self as an equally creative. It's not that I knew that I was equally creative, but I wasn't getting that feedback from the world. I'm used to people coming up on the street and basically, as you saw in the film, it's Joel and, who cares? So during the course of the filming, I have to say, by both of them, really felt supported, but in particular by Manon, who I always felt was like doing this to me, come on, equal time here, you can do this. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Joel, how about you? How did you feel after watching this condensed footage?
That even at 87, there's still things you can learn about yourself and change while there's still time. And so I certainly have seen some inherited behaviors that I've lived with my whole life. I can see my father in myself. I can see even my brothers in myself. So that part was important, I think, to see a reflection of that and realize, okay, I can remake something, or I could try at least. But it was during the filming and after, before we saw any film, that was really interesting because we're very private people. I think artists often are. In order to be able to engage with your work, you need to have a kind of headspace that gives you this personal momentum, unobstructed by anybody else's intervention in your life. So to have given that over to them, succumbed to their charms, but also lived through it. And I have to say that I really resisted making any contributions to the making of the film. I resisted looking in the camera the way, see what was set up. It was their film to make, and I needed to restrain my own energies. But once I lived through this and it was over, I felt the loss of our interaction and the comfort of it and the conversations we had after filming, when we would be cooking together and sitting in front of the fire and talking. The life that was established between the four of us. For a while I thought that should be the film, because it was so intimate, and between these two 40-year-apart generations, it was amazing. And when that was gone, there was a sense of absence, really.
I'd like to ask you both the same thing, Manon and Jacob. How did you feel? Because you're not really on the other side of the camera so much in this film. Really, it's about the four of you. You're also protagonists in that story. How did you feel? Having gone through that process, having made that film, at the other end of it.
When Jacob invited me to be a part of this project, I had no intention of making films. I was a photographer. I was very happy being a photographer. I had no real interest in the medium other than watching films. But what I was struck by was Maggie and Joel, and this relationship and this very vivacious love that they have for one another and the energy that they exude. And it's very rare to meet two people that give you positive energy, where you can walk away from a situation and feel enlivened. And that's these two people. And for me, it was a study of what it would be to be in my 70s and 80s and be in a loving relationship. It was much more of a projection into the future of what we could possibly have. And it's not something that I have very many models of. So in that respect, the process was a gift to me, to understand what it is to be in a relationship and understand what it is to have conflict and then find resolution and use humor in relationships.
Such an interesting thing to say, because, most people would say if they have an example of that, it would be maybe their parents. It might be a relationship that they might want to emulate, they might not want to emulate. But even with I guess it's quite rare to be in that same space, right? Even with your own parents at that age. So it's very interesting.
But I think with parents, there's a separation already, because they're your parents.
Exactly, there's another
You
thing
can't
at play.
really love their relationship. You can obviously love your parents, but the love they have for one another, there's a disconnect. You want to maybe mirror it, but not in the exact same way. And to find this and be able to see it and observe it and the details of your relationship and the nuances of your conversation in a way where I haven't lived it because I don't share a history with them is very freeing.
Yeah, it's very unique. Can I just ask you a more sort of practical question? It's in two halves, really, but because you mentioned, Joel, you mentioned your input in the filmmaking process. As filmmakers, how much were you completely in control of what you were filming and of the post-production process, of the editing process? Or did you two have anything to say about that?
Sure. No. I mean, Maggie and Joel's involvement actually stemmed from their artistic practices, insofar as the cinematography is inspired by Joel's way of seeing the world, and where what's happening on the edge of the frame is just as significant as what's happening in the middle. We also chose, it felt right to have a language we established early in some test filming, to have a language whereby the camera would always be locked off and not moving, and this kind of composed frames whereby there was an opportunity of a kind of proscenium arch that kind of felt theatric. And also when we were looking at the footage, it felt like you could enter the space as a viewer and have the freedom to look around. It felt like the right language, and all of this came from Joel's way of seeing and photographing. And then equally, the score of the film was informed by Maggie's wonderful compositions, which in of themselves form a kind of emotional pulse. But then when Diogo Strauss, the composer, was building more music sequences. He kind of studied Maggie's way of playing and built, music coming from that. So their involvement was embedded in the DNA of the film language. But beyond that, as Joel said, they showed a huge amount of restraint, which was very freeing and amazing for us. And then in terms of the editing, we edited the film for a year. We edited part of it with an editor in the UK called Josh Malalia, and then we moved to Copenhagen, where we lived for 7 months or so, and we were working with a production company called Final Cut for Real, who made films like The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence and Flea and The End recently, out today. And they're really masters of documentary. And so working with our editor, Estefan Wagner, and Sina Berg Sorensen, who produced the film with us, and Janis Biliskov Jensen, who's an amazing editor, we had this incredible collaboration with people who weren't part of the shooting process and people of all different ages. So the read on the material from people from different generations was so kind of steeped and layered, and actually they helped us identify the transgenerational value of the material beyond what we were capable of seeing ourselves. So it was a real collaborative experience in terms of how to build the story that has such a formal film language and make it sort of comprehensible, hopefully, for an audience to be able to follow the story without any clear signpostings,
Yeah, and then Maggie and Joel came to see the film when we were a week away from Final Cut, so after a year of editing, and Maggie and Joel didn't have any notes. They felt like it was all very well represented and true to their experience.
You mentioned reflecting Joel's vision, cinematographic vision, in the use of the cameras. Now, this comes from a colleague's input, because I know nothing about photography, but am I right in saying you used a camera that's more often used for street photography? You used that to shoot film, right? Is that
Almost.
Because of this? Almost.
Yeah, well, we used a Leica, but the particular Leica, so this camera here that Joel's modelling today, this is nerdy stuff, so I'll be brief. Joel holds a Leica M, and that's a sort of traditional street camera, whereas we were filming on the Leica SL2s, which are digital SLRs. So they're not street photography cameras per se, but Leica build incredible cameras for whatever your needs. And God, they should be paying for this stuff. And basically, we were the first feature film ever to make a full-length feature on a digital Leica. It had never been done before. But they looked great, and they were tiny and very discreet, and meant that we could get these intimate moments of reality and sneaking into hospitals and stuff like that. And yet, on the big screen, they look amazing.
Yeah, and it also meant that we could leave the room often. We would set the camera up on a tripod and we would not necessarily be with Maggie and Joel, which allowed for even more intimacy and the conversations to unfold as they did.
These cameras can be started on your phone. They can watch what the camera sees. So we were independent and on our own a lot of the time, but they could turn the camera on when they saw something happening that was great, so that it was free form in that way, and truly a documentary without any sense of directors being present. That's part of the time. I mean, there were plenty of times we were all together, for sure.
I think that was also what was important about it being static, was to allow Maggie and Joel to live their lives and be as they are, not be followed, not have the camera interrupt what is going on.
Well, I had a question about that, so you basically answered it. Thank you very much. I'm aware I've been speaking for quite a while, and we have questions in the audience. So we have a roving mic, so I'm going to put it to you. If you have questions or comments or anything you want to ask our guest. Yes, question in the second row.
Thank you. It's an amazing film. Can I ask about the moments where you might have felt consciously performative, or the times that you didn't feel performative at all and forgot that maybe the camera was there and The kind of the
Are you
dance that you
asking
had,
me
both
or
both of
us?
you,
Mhm.
both of you, the kind of dance you had with that consciousness, if that makes
That's
sense.
a great question. And the answer for me is that it didn't feel performative. I knew from the beginning that Jacob and Manon really wanted to get the essence of who we were. And I remember saying early on, because in the beginning, Jacob said, well, we'll come down to Tuscany for a few weeks. And it happened to be that was one of those years in life that had a lot more going on, like selling the flat in New York, like breaking a leg, like leaving Tuscany. And so there was really a lot going on. But because we trusted them and respected them right from the beginning, we felt free to just live our lives the way they were. So, I mean, maybe the first day or two we were aware of, we're being filmed. But really after that, no.
Thank you very much. Do you want to add something?
You said it all.
Thank you for your question.
Do we have any other questions in the room? Don't be shy. First one's usually hardest. There we go. One question. Thank you.
Thank you. The timeline of the film seems to generally follow like chronologically, and they're like you're living in Tuscany, and then you have the accident, and then you move to New York. But I was just wondering in general whether there was any editing decisions where you played around with the chronology, whether there's like certain scenes and certain conversations that were put non-chronologically, and if so, why?
This was the lay of the year that you see. It's incredibly complex to make a film like this, and obviously it's not like 1-to-1 this then this then this, but generally those chunks are chronological. The fine line that you walk is about telling an emotional truth as well, because we're not filming all the time. So sometimes you have to have the courage to impressionistically knit two things together that tell a larger emotional truth than a kind of day-to-day truth.
Thank you very much. I've got one question there, and then we'll come to you.
And thank you so much for a beautiful film. Could you speak a bit more about when you thought... Oh, sorry. Thank you for such a beautiful film, all of you. And I just wanted to know a bit more about when you decided the choice of times to film and how you would set them up. And it seemed that the choices were quite exquisite, actually. And it had such a particular intimacy. So yeah, we relied heavily on Maggie and Joel inviting us wherever they went and keeping us up to date with their schedules. And luckily we formed a relationship where we were speaking every day, and we still speak every day. And the first few weeks was getting to know one another. It was understanding what this could be, and well, for us to understand what this could be. This is our first documentary. This is the first long form film that we've made. And we had really not much idea of what we were doing. So we were just collecting. And as we learnt, documentaries is all about collecting. So we were game to be there whenever we were invited. So our task was to collect and keep an open dialogue. And we were really lucky to have two people who were so embracing of us that there was nothing off limits. When Maggie broke her leg, Jacob and I thought, we're fucked. This is the end. The film isn't going anywhere. They're going to tell us we need to heal and life is too overwhelming, la, 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 la. And we were messaging, making sure Maggie was okay. And then a couple of days later, we spoke to Joel and he was like, where are you? Like, life is happening now. Like, where are you? Down here now. So, and of course we did. And that set the tone, really, going forth. Like, we already knew that, but that was the moment where we knew nothing was off limits. We just needed to be there when life was happening. And so that we did. And so you'd set the camera up in a certain place on a certain day.
On a day-to-day level, because we were living under the same roof as Maggie and Joel, we had our section of the house that we were staying in with a very messy equipment bedroom. But there were no kind of days in a traditional sense. Every hour there's a kind of an opportunity. A lot of the time, well, most of the doc was probably shot with one camera, but every now and then we would leave other cameras dotted around. And as Joel says, we could access them with a remote. So we were kind of always on and looking for opportunities. And when you live with people, you get to know their patterns and routines really well.
We're creatures of habit. We do the same thing over and over again.
And
we have the same conversations quite often.
We also filmed, over the year of filming, there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of material to get down to this 100 minutes. So,
I'm an editor, so I understand that. Documentary editor.
Where were you?
Thank you very much. We have a question, yes, at the front row, please. Front row, just there. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a comment more than a question. I'm so pleased to be here because during the whole film, I'd no sense that you were there at all. And I think that's quite amazing because often when you see a documentary, you're so aware of the person who's making the documentary. So congratulations. Wonderful. Another one is a total personal comment. You talk quite a bit during the film about preparing for death or what's going to happen. Joe and I are exactly the same age as you were in the film. And Joe's got cancer. And yet I realise we hardly ever talk about this or think about it. And we've just said now we need to talk about the film, but we're writing a book together. We need to do it after we finish the book, which goes on forever. But I realised, so it's not a question, but we don't talk about, and at first it really struck me how often you were talking about it. And I've learned to think, well, maybe we should spend some time thinking about that. So thank you very much.
It's really brave of you.
Thank you very much for the comment.
As you age, as you'll all know at some point in your lives, death, which is always unexpected when you're young, it's way out there. But as you age, when you hit your 70s and 80s, death is sort of coming up alongside. It's just tapping you on the shoulder a little bit to let you know that things are changing and fading, and it's inevitable. And so we both are sensitive to that, and we've discussed it in ways that are just very simple, recognizing it and being able to share with each other. It's not something that goes on all the time, but once in a while, something offers itself. A friend dies, or you feel something urgent that you want to share with each other, because if you don't say it now, you may forget. And so it becomes a reality, and I think it's age appropriate in that regard, and we didn't shirk from it, and it's been helpful, I think, for both of us to make sure you get your will in order and you make an archive that is going to last beyond you. Whatever my kids will do with it, who knows? But at least I'm not going to leave a mess for them so that they can sort it out too late. I mean, I'll sort it out now and enjoy the process. So I think both of us are realists in that regard, and we're fantasists in our creative life.
Can I just ask, was that quite a conscious theme when you sat down to edit? Did that kind of present itself immediately, that thread of death and passing on? Was that obvious to you?
It was actually one of the first things that we filmed, and we didn't. Well, it was one of those things where Maggie and Joel were doing the laundry, so we set up the camera and we thought, we'll just leave the cameras running and we'll walk out the room. And we left, and it wasn't until later that evening that we found out what their conversation was, and it really went in deep for us that this is what these people are talking about. This is the reality of what they're processing. And then with Maggie's leg break, it was something that just continued to present itself, and of course, when we were editing it was present. And yeah.
Yeah, there were kind of a couple of themes that became apparent over the first month or two of filming, and mortality was one, yeah. Which is beautiful and wonderful, and is so rare to kind of see presented or discussed, and is something that as younger people we felt really enlivened by. You know, this is not something that you can escape, and you never know when your ending might be, and actually to have two people so consciously facing it and navigating it, not just individually but in a relationship, felt so amazing and rare to us and fascinating. So
because there must have been so many ways you could have gone with it in terms of the thread, and that really kind of stuck out, which is so powerful.
Yeah. Yes, second row, and then I'll come to you in the fourth row. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The movie was absolutely, I think, amongst all the movies that I've seen this year, one of the best, I got to be honest. Anyway, I would like to ask Maggie, there was a scene in the movie when you were burning all your memories. And I wonder, what was your feelings? Did you feel like free finally to free yourself from all the emotions that you written down on the paper? I really want to know how you felt.
Sure. So we were in the process of going through the apartment in New York in preparation for selling it. And we now live in London in a very small apartment. And I had been going through tons of things. And then I saw, these 2 shelves of my journals, 60 odd journals or something. And where am I going to put those in London? And then I looked at them and I'm like, why the hell do I want them? They had done their job. Those journals were the place that I went to for 30-odd, 40 years to ask the questions that I needed to hear and to answer, to write the things that I was longing to have and wondering why I couldn't get them. They were filled with yearning and pain and, bad relationships and all really the dreck of life. And I thought, what, do I think I'm going to sit in an attic one day when I'm 90 and read? Why the hell would I want to do that? I've already lived it. And the other piece was, we have children. I wouldn't want them to read those things, So, and also for me, it was a piece of, because, as a writer, no matter what you're writing, or as any creative person, you're always hoping that somebody else is going to see it or read it. So I think a lot of the time I envisioned, one day I'm going to be a famous writer and this will be my archive. God forbid. So to let go of those journals was also letting go of a kind of ambition that I had, and I just found it incredibly freeing. And it was interesting because every once in a while, I'd catch a glimpse of something and be sort of tempted to go in there. And I think, no, done. Yeah, it felt great. I recommend it highly.
Thank you. Can I ask Joel one question? I wonder which moment of your life you felt like photography was your calling and you went into it with your full heart. What was the moment?
I have, as everybody has, a genesis story, a moment of recognition. I was 24 years old. I had studied painting. I was in graduate school for art history in New York City, and I was making a living as a junior art director in a small advertising agency. I had designed a little booklet, 16 pages, and my boss hired Robert Frank, a friend of his, to shoot the booklet. I didn't know Robert Frank. I knew nothing about photography. I was in the world of painting. I went down to the shoot to make sure he photographed all the things in the sequence we needed. And watching him work with a camera just like this, the silence of it, and how just as the subjects were doing something that reached some kind of visual peak, the camera went click. And I was standing behind him. He paid no attention to me, but I could watch these moments transform themselves and then hear the click. And it did something to me. I thought for the first time, a fresh thought, oh, photography is time. You stop time. You select a moment in the flow of time as if that is speaking just to you. And when I left the shoot, I went out into the street and the world came alive. I saw things like somebody waving for a taxi. Taxi! And the gesture was, it was dramatic. It was sculptural. It was magnetic. Or someone carrying a baby in her arms, or their laundry from something. The form of people's bodies, the emotional content, all of the interactions on the street. I would have taken a bus back to the agency, but I walked the 40 blocks just so I could keep seeing. And when I got to the agency, my boss said, "How was the shoot?" I said, "Harry, it was terrific. I'm quitting the agency." He said, "Oh no, was it a disaster?" I said, No. It transformed me. I want to be a photographer." And that was it. He said, "You have a camera?" I said, "No." He said, "Schmuck, how are you going to make pictures?" And he opened his drawer and he gave me his camera to use for a few weeks until I could buy a camera. And that was it. On Friday, I was out the door, and I've never been back. So it was transformative like that.
Oh, thank you for asking that question. That was a great story to tell. Thank you. I just have one question for through, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for the film. I enjoyed it so much, and it was wonderful to meet two such beautiful people on the screen. So my question is, basically the film reminded me of a documentary of incomparably worse that I made years ago about the relationship between me and my twin sister, because we also had a lot to unpack, and it was during COVID, and the film helped me understand that relationship. But what I feared from that film, and I was wondering if this was your experience perhaps, was that it fixed a narrative onto our relationship that then it was hard to escape from later.
Wow, what a great question. What an I'd love to know how that's worked out for you. Maybe because we've had already lived such a huge chunk of life and had been through so many evolutions in our separate lives and together as a relationship, that never was a question. If anything, the film encouraged us to just keep on evolving and not to stay fixed. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Thank you very much for that. And we'll come back to second row, please. The roving mic, thank you. Just that lady, thank you.
It's for Maggie. Well, I was just going to say, yeah, that there was just a lovely kind of continuation of, your blue eyes throughout the documentary that I thought was really nice, and the mad emotions that went through them. But it was actually a question for both of you. And Jacob, I heard you're writing a play, and I'd love to hear what it's about.
Wow, question of the evening. Yes, one of the great joys is the ongoing collaboration, because I have to say that when Jacob and Manon moved to Denmark, I was very jealous that other people were now collaborating with them, and I also miss them really a lot. Very briefly, because Jacob and I are at a very important moment in the development of the play, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but it was originally an idea that I had about 15 years ago, and I started writing it, and then I thought, it's a really great idea, but I need somebody who has something else to bring to the writing that I don't have. And I think that's really a wonderful part of collaboration, is knowing where your strengths are and knowing where your weaknesses are. Because for me, being an artist is always being in service to the work. It's not about, I did this. So I had spoken about the idea several times, and I had my eye on Jacob, but he was busy with a documentary. And then it finally came to sort of an end last September, and we were all walking in Regent's Park, weren't we? And Jacob said, I was talking to a writer friend of mine, because I'd asked him if he knew anybody who would be good for this. And my friend said that I should do it. And I said, yeah, Jacob. So very minimally, and then maybe you would like to add to this too, whatever feels comfortable. There are 3 main characters on stage. One is a mother in her 70s. One is her daughter in her 40s. And the third character, who's called Then, is the mother's past. So it's a play very much about loss and belonging and relationship and mothers and daughters, but it's also a play about the way the past informs our present lives, the way that we sometimes let the past manipulate us because we're locked in an old story that we think will always perpetuate. Like, this is husband number 5. When I got to number 4, I thought, well, that's it, because the past is telling me that's not for me. So the ways in which we are beholden to the past, the ways in which the past is always in our minds while something else comes out of our mouths, and the way that if we choose, we can learn from the past and start to make different decisions. So that's what I'm going to say about the play, and I'd love it if you would like to.
Good pitch. Yeah, I think it stems from a lot of Maggie's lived experiences, and we have created a new fiction that stems from those things, and it's about mother-daughter relationship, and it's about what it is to be an adopted person, and to be in your later years and still somehow yearning for a mother, or a biological mother.
It's also absurd. I mean, for me, it was very important that the play had a level of absurdity to it, because the past is absurd. I was once you also know from the film that I'm a recovered alcoholic, and early in sobriety, I was in a meeting and everybody in the room was complaining, like, if I'd only got sober, if I hadn't do this. And it came to the woman next to me who was knitting, and she didn't look up. She said, you have to give up all hope for a better past.
Fair point. Thank you very much for those questions. How are we doing? How are we doing for time? The master of time has exited the screen, so I don't know. We'll see if someone kicks us out eventually. Okay, one more question. No pressure. Make it a good one. There we go. Third row from the back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure what my question is, but I'm thinking I'm here with my husband, and I'm so interested in the way the film talks about relationships and emotions and rage, which is a subject I'm very interested in, as you know. And I think there's something fascinating about how you made the project very specific and very much about relationships universally. And I wondered if you could talk a bit more about that but specifically about rage and how you feel about that.
I'm just going to start with the rage because rage is not my comfortable spot. Very uncomfortable with anger and rage. And witnessing that argument was quite the experience, but I learnt a lot from it. And what I learnt is that you can have anger and rage and find resolution all in one go and with humour. And that taught me so much. It's allowed me to be angry. It's allowed space for the possibility of anger. And it's an important part of a relationship. And if you don't have the freedom to be angry, then you don't have the freedom in the relationship. And that was a huge gift. And it's a gift that is out there in the world for people to see and witness.
And I think women's rage too, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, anger, rage. Rage. Let's talk about anger, okay? Everybody feels it. A lot of people don't express it. Everybody's frightened of it. Anger doesn't kill, actually. And for a woman, how many times do we ask for something or remark on something and we don't feel heard, and so we say it a little bit louder? And then we still don't feel heard, and so we yell, and then we get accused of yelling. And so we're still not heard. And I also want to say, I know that this can go both ways. I know it's not just an issue for women, but I think we could all say it is more of an issue for more women. I'm fortunate enough to be with a man who actually made it clear very early on in our relationship that anger terrified him. And I thought, oh, well, you're in for a ride. But what I love about Joel is his willingness to eventually listen. And sometimes I do still have to yell to be heard, and I don't have a problem with that. So
I did get a comment the other day. Somebody wrote to me and said how grateful they were to have seen that scene, because so often if you yell, if you're angry for a woman and there's rage, you get accused of having PMS or like being out of mind, basically, and not with sound. And what that demonstrated was that you are sound and you are allowed to be that. And I think it's a real gift for women having that out there in the world. And yeah.
And also I have to say that it's been a gift surprisingly for men, because I wondered when this went out in the world how it would be for men. I expected actually quite a bit of flack, and maybe it's still coming. But surprisingly, a lot of men have come up after screenings and said how important that film was, that scene was for them, because they could see their own behavior and they could see the ways in which they don't listen. And there's a wonderful story, isn't there, about Estefan, the editor, who, as you can imagine, saw that scene many times. And he said that every time it would get to the part where Joel would start to say something, he would go, "No, Joel, no, don't."
Don't say it.
I think it echoes so many relationships, and that's why it's absolutely fascinating to see it played out both for your specific characters and more generally. I think that's a massive gift.
Well, thank you for
film.
having the courage to ask the question. Well done.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question to end it on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Huge thank you to our guests and to our audience for those great questions. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Garden Cinema.